Welcome to the Kidney Quest, Episode 2, brought to you by Darth Sarah. Today's guest is Greg Hess. Thank you so much for coming in, Greg. It's so funny because I feel like I know you for ages, but we only know each other since technically a little after May?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I think it was roughly June that I met your husband and then you in the waiting room at the transplant center.
I think that was our 1 month checkup or something. A little bit of a backstory again for the viewers. Greg and I went through a transplant surgery last year on May 10th, 2023. And I was the donor and then Greg was the recipient. Greg, if you want to give us a little bit of an intro about yourself and a backstory of why you became a kidney recipient.
Sure. Physician, was practicing until May. I may go back to clinical practice. I've also been a researcher for many years, but I do largely clinical research, meaning working with patients and patient data. I'm also trained in health services research, and that's more statistics, epidemiology, but also processes and operations. And so that's part of my interest, is how things work and how we can improve them. The way that I came to transplant was kind of neat in a sense that I often thought about that my daughter, in essence, saved my life first. We have adopted 2 daughters from China. And as a busy physician, seeing patients, doing research, all those things, of course, we never go and get ourselves examined. But for the adoption process, they said you have to go get a physical. Over the years, people would be drawing blood on me for really many times just learning how to draw blood or things like that. And every once in a while, they would see a very low potassium in my bloodstream. And we'd all kind of wrinkle our foreheads a bit, but they'd go through and say, "How are you feeling?" And I'd say, "Fine." And there were no signs or symptoms of a problem. So we'd often chalk it up to some lab error. The machines are not perfect, especially a number of years ago. And they would repeat it and it would seem to go away. So it wasn't until I had the physical for my daughter that they were surprised to see that my kidney function was lower than it should be. So as we pursued that and worked that up, we found out that I had a relatively unknown genetic mutation. Now that genetics is much more available today, we understand precisely why that was there, but it was sort of diagnosed as a wastebasket. We use that term for things we don't know. And that's how they found out about my kidney problem. So I've known for a long time, but I knew it because I had to get a physical before we adopted my first daughter. So if it hadn't been for her, it was silent, and I probably would not have known for many years until it was much more severe.
Wow. So when you say silent, sorry, I'm not trained in medical at all. It's like you didn't have any symptoms, you didn't have anything significant that would make you question.
That's largely what the term means. We may all hear it when we talk about high blood pressure, which is a big driver of kidney disease progression, is undiagnosed hypertension or high blood pressure. Many people will say, "Oh, I feel totally fine." And we'll take a look at their blood pressure.
I started my process, I think it was around 2022 August. I got the email from one of the churches that we used to go to. They have the prayer email that they send out every, I think, Friday or something. And it's interesting because I usually don't read those because we left the church. Nothing negative. It's just, work and life balance. And I never opened them. It was just that one day that I'm like, I'll just click on it without thinking. So it was just out of the blue. I clicked it. I saw a link there. I started reading a little, and basically that said Greg Hess needs a kidney. And it just, something hit me hard to see that there's a person out there right now that is in dire need of something. For me, it was knowing your story, knowing your backstory, because you did write this, I think it was like a 2-paragraph story of, here's who I am, this is my family, here's what's going on with me. And that was the moment I said, hey, now that I'm invested in your story, is anyone doing something about it?
Wow.
That's when I first started, and I reached out to, I think it was the National Kidney Registry, which then brought my information to UPenn. And then from that point on, again, from me sending that message to them reaching out to me, I think was about less than a week. They're already like, hey, thanks for your interest. So far with your blood type and everything, you are a pre-match. Let's get you started with more. And then from that point on, it was about 3 months of blood work here, 18 tubes. We're going to do a CAT scan with you, that sort of a thing, which I thought it was amazing that not just the person who's receiving, but obviously for your health and safety, the amount of things that they go through. It did remind me the importance of going to checkups, and what kind of checkups you need. Don't miss out on it. There's so many things that you might actually be able to find that in the long run. So since you've gotten the diagnosis, what was your path from there?
Well, that's where I had a little bit of a silver lining. Of course, none of us want to get a diagnosis like that. Once you're diagnosed with most kidney diseases, unfortunately, the large majority of them are progressive, meaning they just keep going. But on the positive part, there are things you can do to really slow down that progression. And that was where I was fortunate as a physician and a researcher that I was able to read the literature. I'm not an expert in kidney disease. I'm trained in emergency medicine and fellowships in other areas as well. So I'm not a nephrologist, but I understand how to read the literature. So I was able to understand that things like a lower animal protein diet is very beneficial. High blood pressure is the biggest driver of kidney disease progression for many people. I'd always had low blood pressure, but that was good to know, and I wanted to keep it low. So there were some things along those lines that really helped me to slow down that progression. So really it was over, many, many years, probably about really 20 when I look back on it.
So the progression you said was about that long.
If I think back to where we first saw those very low potassium results in my blood test and realize, kept reoccurring. And then we started to put together some other pieces. I, for example, was born about 2 months premature. And one of the things that develops in those last couple of months are more kidney cells. So if you're born early, you have good working kidneys, but you don't have as many kidney cells as someone who goes with a 9-month gestation. So that was a little bit of a contributing factor.
And then when did you start to really feel that, for the lack of a better word, like the deterioration of your kidney functions?
Yeah, because it was a progressive piece, I'd say, especially the last 4 or 5 years was getting more and more difficult. You start to develop things that are related to your kidney disease, for example, anemia. I didn't realize, because it's not my field, that a lot of the red blood cell stimulators we all produce comes from our kidneys. So without those, you become anemic. And then without enough red blood cells in the anemia, you start to get fatigued a lot. And my specialty was pretty energetic. So that was something where I started to really hit the wall, so to speak, about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I just wanted to lay down and take a nap. You really can't do that in our jobs, our lives, many times. And then you start to get into brain fog, they talk about. So it's hard to describe, but you really have to sort of struggle through many times. And that's where the toxins and things in your bloodstream are accumulating. And then I guess lastly, but very importantly, I'd say I'd always been a pretty, I think, positive, constructive person. But you start to think about, I'm going to die sooner than I expected. It doesn't look like I'm going to get a kidney. And there's always that sort of specter standing on your shoulder saying, you don't have long to live.
How do you push yourself to think in the positive while your body is in the negative, right? It's such a hard balance. It's easy to say, don't overthink it. It's going to be okay. But then there's always that, like, what if it's not okay? What are we going to do? It must have been very, very hard for you to just try to balance that.
At least the way I look at things, everything has its pros and cons or strengths and weaknesses. So it's really a lot of pluses. I had a very supportive family. Maybe on the con side, we had decided for various reasons, partly my personality, but also my roles and things, that we didn't share it with a lot of people. So trying to keep that to yourself, was a bit challenging from a mental health perspective sometimes.
And at what point did you start thinking about transplants? Was that something that was in your scope when you were first diagnosed a long time ago, or was it something that you didn't really think about yet, but at some point it was like, no, you really have to start thinking about getting into that line?
Did think about getting a transplant early on. As you know, that transplant is considered the best treatment, or we often say the gold standard. So I was fortunate. My sister had said that she would step forward and had some initial workup. So it didn't look like there were any issues. And at that point, Penn disqualified my sister from being able to donate. So I was suddenly without a donor, and you sort of go back to the start of the process.
And if I may ask, do you know what the reason for decline was?
She periodically had some episodes of chest discomfort. I think on the side of caution that they felt, even though her cardiologist said that they didn't see a problem, there was some concern there from their standpoint. They have a committee and they'll look at the data and other things and they'll say, we don't believe you should donate. And they have the final say, the transplant center. So I did have a nurse who surprisingly, they said, well, we're disqualifying you because we have two concerns. One is that you ride horses, and if you fell off the horse, you could injure your remaining kidney if you had donated. So that seemed a little surprising. And then the other was that she had a family history of breast cancer, which of course is pretty common. However, she didn't have any breast cancer, but they were looking into the future and saying, well, what if you get breast cancer and then you have one kidney? You may have difficulty getting chemotherapy. So again, it was kind of about a pro and a con, left me scrambling, trying to find another donor before I got to end-stage renal disease. It was interesting. That person went to another transplant center and they seemed to approve her. So it just also educated me that there's a lot of variability between transplant centers.
That's definitely interesting. Part of it, I understand, right? Like everybody's different cases and all that. But what is something we can do or we can make a change so that there is that overarching criteria, especially if it's, for example, if it's your body, like physically or physiologically affect you, I understand. So for example, the whole, the breast cancer history, that's more understandable for me. But your lifestyle, honestly, shouldn't really matter, because for me, that sounds like I wouldn't go as far as it's discriminating, because I do understand where it's coming from. But there's, again, so many people in this world with one kidney or with other conditions that are actually bravely living their life that they would like to. At some point, I feel like there has to be a balance of, yes, this is what you do, but we respect it, because at that point, it's kind of your responsibility, right? Because I do things that are not really recommended, I'm actually more careful for myself now too, which is a great education. The way I live, the things I eat, the things I drink. If I'm going to do martial arts, then how can I protect myself so that I can still enjoy the things I want to enjoy, but also protecting myself? So let's not decline it for those specific reasons, but instead educate on how we can still live those life with the condition we have and hopefully open more doors.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point and an interesting aspect. One of the transplant surgeons said, I can't imagine having a committee tell me whether or not I could donate my kidney if I needed to my son or daughter. Now, certainly because they understand the pros and cons, but that's really the purpose of informed consent, that you inform the patients of the risk and the benefits. And the other term I guess we think about a lot, right, is shared decision making, is promoted in medicine, and I think that's a great thing. So one might think about it in this situation and say, well, if I've shared with whomever, here's the risk that we see. Some of them are more hypothetical in the future. No evidence today, for example, of breast cancer, but it could happen 10 years from now. But many people that probably fall in that category a little bit should arguably be able to make that decision for themselves, again, as long as they've been informed. We see a lot in the literature talk about, parochialism and those types of things. So it's an interesting area.
I think going in the process, I would say there was no lack in education or consent that was given to me. But I feel like, just like you said, it would have been nice to have a little bit more of contributing what I would like to do based on my lifestyle and whatnot. Because there's no perfect human, right? There's going to be the ups and downs. And if you keep finding that perfect person who's super healthy, will not have an issue, most likely will survive until a good age, it's so difficult to begin with. If I were to go in whatever years, let's say that I need a kidney, do I have to worry that I have to wait until this perfect, healthy human comes in my life and match with me? Because that's more of a worry than, there's a little bit of leeway. One thing I noticed is that the hospital, they cover for up to 1 year of care. And I think once in the next 2 years, I get like a checkup with UPenn, but that's it. Now, as for checkup purposes, I personally believe that that's more than enough. If I'm doing well, I'm doing well. But for both the recipient and the donor, this is a lifetime decision. And so should that time come that we might need some help and we might need some advice, where do we go? That was my very first kind of question of what comes after that. The great thing was, specifically on UPenn, the people, they're amazing. They gave me a lot of contact to talk to NKR, talk to National Kidney Foundation. Those people are amazing. But for those who are not blessed enough to have that good push, for example, I still get about 1 or 2 DMs on my Instagram per month of like, hey, considering to be a donor for my family, or, my spouse is actually looking into it, but I want to stop him, that sort of a thing. My understanding is, per your transplant center basis, the amount of education you're getting is either top notch or like absolutely none. And there's some in betweens that you do get some basic stuff, but there's just no coherency in what you're receiving. There are people like, I don't know where to go to. I donated. It's been 3 months. How long are they going to see me? Do you know anything about this? And it shouldn't be that, And so what are the things that we should do to make sure that care emotionally and physically is not just 1 or 2 years, but somehow it is a lifelong thing, because we are now in this community of people that gave and people that received. I do believe that NKRs and the NK are basically that. But still, as an outreach, I feel like there's something a little bit more that we can on an individual basis on where that education goes or where that care goes.
Yes, and it certainly makes me think about the National Kidney Foundation, NKF, that you mentioned. As you know, they have somewhere between 8 to 10 pieces of legislation that are being reviewed through House of Representatives and the Senate. If they pass, we'll want to go through the entire process, which is very difficult to even become noticed and then get endorsed as a bill, and having a sponsor, co-sponsors, et cetera. So there's a lot of steps, and certainly it'd be doubtful, if not impossible, that all 8 to 10 of those will pass. However, some of those are designed to address the kinds of things you're talking about. Like one, for example, is to help eliminate discrimination for health insurance and life insurance and disability insurance for donors for their lifetime. And right now we know that there is discrimination that occurs along those lines. So you raise a very, very good, excellent points. It also reminded me, Sarah, that I think as you're talking about, and I've thought about the variability you see between different centers. You were talking about the educational differences in this case, but there's tremendous variability, and it often reminds me that people like Demings, Duran, leaders in this field of constant process improvement. And I think it's very interesting and good that the UNOS organization, the United Network for Organ Sharing, If you were to go on, or we were to go on their website today, they actually have a section where they talk about the need for continuous improvement. And one of those is probably this variability, because groups like the Institute of Medicine and others have pointed out that when you see variability between transplant center A and transplant center B, you have to ask yourself, well, why is there variability? More importantly, which one produces the best outcomes, the best results?
There's still, I think, about 90,000 people or more still waiting as we speak. If it was 90,000 last year, it apparently is still 90,000. What more can we do? I am sure that there are people out there like me that are really eager. What else can we do to make that difference in your perspective? And that can be coming from a donor, that can be coming from a recipient, to make the ball rolling faster than it is right now, to a point that, let's say this is a big shot dream, but like by 2025, that 90,000 went to 80,000, or go to 70,000. What is that one step you think we need to really get that motion pushed?
Well, I think that's a great question. And certainly there are other folks who would love to weigh in. To your point, as we're sitting here today, 13 to 17 people are dying every day, just literally waiting for a kidney. There's been a lot of debate around the current law that's in place. It's called NOTA. I think it's called the National Organ Transplant Act. And it's great that it enabled transplant, but at the same time, it has prohibitions that really are not commonly seen in medicine and in research. And many people, and I'm part of that group, argue they should be removed. One specifically is to allow pilot programs to be conducted. One of those aspects would be around removing any financial barriers to donors like yourself. They've estimated the cost is somewhere between $43,000 to $63,000, and it can go up higher and lower depending on where you live. But for many people, they hear that cost and simply say, hey, I just can't bear that type of out-of-pocket cost to donate to someone, even if they're in fact my relative. If we do it, we find out it really does. We save, I think, about $500,000 as taxpayers every time a patient moves from dialysis to getting a transplant. So it's one of those very, very few cost savings, not just cost effective, but cost savings procedures in medicine, where the person gets an extended life, a great quality of life, and we as taxpayers all save money. It's just a phenomenal win-win.
Sure. I think overall, the UPenn system was amazing, for sure. A lot of the things were already covered. And I do live relatively close, and Penn does have a lot of lab works that are basically everywhere. So that part was great. Fortunately, back in the time, I was a full remote worker. My company was full remote. So it was easier for me to get that, the half-day PTO, that sort of a thing. But again, in that sense, though, yes, I do have to take that PTO so that I can go during the weekdays. Because again, not many times that you can get a CAT scan and whatnot during a weekend. Not an issue, but a lot of the challenges came in before the surgery to post-surgery was a little bit anxious one. Because when you are in a transplant list or donor list, they tell you when you get the phone call, it's 3 weeks from then. So I had to be emotionally and physically be ready. So that worry came in when I had to tell my boss then, like, hey, by the way, I'm on the list, which I did. I had to kind of give them a heads up when I first listed myself as a donor, because again, I would be taking time off here and there. Once that 3 week came, I can imagine if I were a full-time in-person work, that surgery date within the 3 weeks for some people might have been difficult. But going in, for the people who are waiting, it's not going to be just another reschedule. I'm pretty sure there's that disappointment and worries and all that kind of a thing. So it was just figuring out what to do from there. They recommend I get off for like 6 weeks. In my case, being very honest with you, I didn't tell them it was going to be 6 weeks. I had a little bit of a worry that I might actually lose my job if I am off to that extent, because of the position that I had. So in my case, I told them, I'm going to be off 2 weeks and you're not going to ask me questions. Now, it ended up not being so well in my case, because going in after that, my recovery was great. It was just Tylenol for me. However, I did need more than 2 weeks of a break. So that did cause a little bit of a strain. NKR was absolutely phenomenal with the wage refunds and whatnot. Again, it was a little outside of that for me. The word was, okay, well, I ended up leaving the company because of a lot of reasons. And it was a great decision that I made. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, what can I do? Where do we go from there? Because as a donor, that's not something we want to share with the UPenn or, for example, the recipient or somebody else. Because again, we don't regret what we've done. But if that hiccup happens, what are the kind of places we can go? And I feel like a part of it is not just the wage refund, but when you do lose a job or when you do have a job change or change in environment, especially within the first few months of donation, if something is covered by then. Not like I'm asking, like, please pay me $4,000 a month. It's just that little something that we need to just do a bare minimum while we try to find something else. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who went into that hiccup. I'm pretty sure some people do lose their job maybe before the surgery, or maybe they have a workplace that's not so understanding, so they end up leaving.
I think that's a great example. And I am so thankful, of course, to say that you donated. I mean, you did. You literally saved my life. I was wondering about, could you bear the financial expense of those things? Some of the people I know who were thinking about donating to me were more in the trades, sort of the blue collar occupations. For them, they were told that they should plan on being out for sure 2 to 3 months. They didn't want them lifting. They did not want them doing many, many common things that they did in their jobs if they were a plumber, electrician, carpenter, all sorts of things like that. So I'm very glad, first of all, that you still went ahead. But I agree, since, again, there's such a huge savings of $500,000 for each person that gets transplanted that we save for Medicare dialysis payments. It sure would seem that we could easily afford to cover a person's out-of-pocket costs for lost wages and things like that. The other part too, I really hadn't thought about. We're fortunate to be in the state of Pennsylvania, where there's quite a few transplant centers, especially in this eastern part. But if we listen to the NPR segments that they've had on kidney transplant, it reminds me that there's individuals, especially out in the Midwest, who they're in a state where there's one transplant center in the entire state. And they've got to drive 5, 6, 7 hours, or plan on staying overnight, paying for meals, all those sorts of things. And it really adds up. Talk a little bit about the financial barriers. I have so much admiration for the National Kidney Registry and the work they do, which includes covering for many people their expenses. Of course, it'd be great if that gets passed as a federal law. A couple of routes that people have talked about that seem to make very good sense is, right now, some reimbursement can occur from this center that we have. So it's already approved, the setup is there, et cetera, but it's not clear how often patients are using that and what amount of reimbursement they're getting. So just in general, expanding that to cover all the out-of-pocket costs, again, would still allow big cost savings, but really take that worry away from patients. So I hope that that happens in the future.
Definitely. So you and I are both going to this National Kidney Foundation, and I think it was called the Summit for Patient Advocacy. Have you been to this before, or is this your first time as well?
I did go to it last year.
Okay.
Before I was a patient, or I guess I was still a patient, but I hadn't been transplanted, maybe a better way. But yes, I've been to it before. National Kidney Foundation is a great organization as well, and it was very well organized, efficient. We had a very good day meeting with our representatives and the senator's staff on the Hill.
That's awesome. Is there anything in particular that you want to talk about or you want to bring on the table for this year's summit?
That's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, there's 8 to 10 bills that are hopeful to get noticed and eventually sponsored and voted on and hopefully passed. So it's a long pathway. Out of those, one of the ones that's arguably the most valuable, but also more controversial. So we'll see what the guidance is from the National Kidney Foundation and what they'd like us to focus on. That would be the recent efforts to really fully reimburse a person. The last language I've seen is to reimburse those donors, $50,000. So that would be great, because again, that's going to cover the majority of donors and certainly the majority of their expenses even. So love to see some emphasis on that this year. Elaine Perlman, a person who heads up an organization called Waitlist Zero, is really spearheading that with a transplant surgeon, Tom Peters, and another donor, Matt Harmony, who's also another physician. So I'm assisting them a bit, but they're really wonderful folks and really understand the pros and cons. Elaine had also donated, and her son also donated, just altruistically. So just like yourself, they're amazing people. That's
awesome. Yeah, this is going to be my first time, so I hope I'm not the only nerd there. As you know me, I usually wear my Vader mask, and I do social media, like cosplay and everything. I will bring my Vader mask there.
That is awesome.
Represent the people of the nerdom. But
you are an amazing person.
Thank you.
Do you want to, before we go, would you like to touch on the Vader mask and when we first met?
The first time we met was at getting that checkup, and I already have my Vader mask.
I knew that a person who would donate a kidney altruistically had to be very unique and special, but in all the good ways. And in that, seeing the Darth Vader mask that you were carrying, and as you know, I wrote up in my piece later, I think I titled it something along the lines of Darth Vader saved my life, is very true. So I thought it was fabulous that you had it there. And it was just so fortuitous that we met the way that we did.
Yeah, I'm an open book. So ever since the process started, I said, hey, if this person ever wants to talk to me, my door is always open. It's just, I wasn't sure. I'm good at people reaching out to me, but I'm not really good at reaching out to people. So I said, that's always open. That's totally fine. But I didn't want to also come across that person like, hey, I donated a kidney for you. Because even if you're not trying to do that, I don't want it to come off as like, I want to meet this person because I did this great thing. So I said, I'm going to wait for it. If it's meant to be, it's going to happen. And that meant to be was, that 1 month checkup where I went. And it's funny because when I was checking in, I saw you and I'm like, I'm pretty sure, because you had the website when I first started everything, right? You had the website where I clicked, I'm like, that guy looks exactly like that guy from the website. But being the introvert that I am, I don't want to be wrong, because it is in a place where people are looking for transplants, and then some people are still devastated. They're still waiting. I can't make that mistake. I texted my husband, who was waiting in the lobby, and said, okay, this is Greg. This is the Greg. I'm going to give you a go. Like, can you talk to him before he leaves? And Steve was like, are you sure this is him? I was like, yeah, no, it is him. It is him. So then I think Steve went and talked to you.
Yes.
I was still in my checkup room, and I'm like, I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. So finally the moment came. I grabbed my Vader mask. I opened the door and I saw you there. And that's when I'm like, I felt the, not post-surgery, but like, you gave me that great closure of like, oh my goodness, you're here. And it's just, that was like it's not the end of our book, because our book still goes on, but it was the end of one chapter that I really wanted to close so that we can start moving on in a great way.
Thank you for sharing that story. For me, in a sense, it gave me closure too. And I'm so glad that I've had an opportunity to thank you, but also to get to know you and Steve and what wonderful people you are. So it's been such a win-win. So I'm so glad that you chose to really reach out, and I got to meet you and know you and your husband.
Definitely. And just one final note, I think what really worked is that website. Knowing your face or knowing your story, knowing what you need, really made me feel like, you know what, I got to fight for this guy. Like we haven't met, obviously we didn't know each other, but that system is phenomenal. And I really hope that education for the patients or for who's waiting right now to look into making that kind of a website really helps, because not only it's easily spreadable, it gives us the story of we're in this together. You know, I am that piece, and it's easier for us to advocate for you. You know, that could be our boss, that could be our family, and be like, look, you know, there's a person with a story. There's a person out there. That's not just a name. That's not just an existence. There's a person with a story that's in need right now. And that is a huge difference. And I really hope that, again, in this type of the interviews that I'm doing with potentially the patients and donors, that I can start putting those faces and stories together and out there. So like that, you know, when you're going in as a donor, you're not just doing this for nothing. There is a person there, and it will go to that person if you keep on trying. So thank you so much for joining. I think this was a much needed talk, because I always wanted to, you know, hear your story and everything. So I'm very glad that we've done it.
Me as well. Thanks again for so many things, including this today. This is kind of a new experience for me, but it's been fun. It's been great chatting with you. And I know that, you know, we'll obviously be in touch, and I'll be seeing you, if not sooner, down in DC at the National Kidney Foundation.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward. We got to take another video picture together there too. So I'll bring it.
That sounds great. Sarah, great seeing you. Say hi to Steve.
I will. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.